Victor Moreau didn't forgive mistakes. He buried them. So when Lena Cross trembled before him on Christmas Eve, champagne soaking his $1,000 suit, she knew her life was over. But instead of violence, he offered something more terrifying, a contract, 5 days as his wife. One unbreakable rule, a payment that could save her or damn her forever. She signed in blood-red ink, not knowing the dead woman's ring on her finger carried a curse, or that the man who bought her desperation would soon refuse to let her go. Welcome to a story of power, protection, and the dangerous line between salvation and possession. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this tale travels. And if you're ready for a Christmas unlike any other, hit that like button and let's begin. The crystal shattered against marble with a sound like bones breaking. Lena Cross stood frozen in the center of Le Cygne Noir's private dining room, champagne dripping from her fingers, her white serving gloves stained dark with expensive wine and her own terror. The dessert she'd been carrying, an architectural masterpiece of spun sugar and gold leaf, lay destroyed across the floor and across the man. Victor Moreau didn't move. He sat perfectly still at the head of the table, dark suit soaked, champagne pooling in his lap, his face carved from ice and shadow. 28 years old and already legendary in the city's underworld. They said he'd inherited his empire at 19 when his father was killed. They said he'd consolidated power by making examples of anyone who challenged him. They said a lot of things about Victor Moreau, and none of them ended well for people who crossed him. Lena had just covered him in champagne and $60 a bite dessert. The silence in the room pressed against her eardrums like deep water. The other servers had vanished the moment the tray slipped from her shaking hands. Even the maitre d' had disappeared. Just Lena, Victor, and the three men seated at his table, all watching her with the calm interest of predators deciding whether prey was worth the chase. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered. Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the cleaning. You'll what?" Victor's voice was soft, almost gentle. That made it worse. "Pay for a suit that costs more than you make in 6 months? With what money, exactly?" Heat flooded Lena's face. He was right. She couldn't pay for anything. The medical bills from her mother's final months had hollowed her out financially. The funeral costs had finished the job. She was 3 months behind on rent, working double shifts at Le Cygne Noir, and still barely making minimums on credit cards she'd maxed out on morphine and hospice care. She had nothing. She was nothing. And now she'd just ruined her only source of income by dumping champagne on the most dangerous man in the city. "Look at me." The command cut through her spiral. Lena forced her eyes up from the floor, past the ruined suit to Victor Moreau's face. He was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful, sharp and cold and merciless. Dark hair swept back from a face of hard angles and harder eyes, the kind of severe handsomeness that made people look away, made them nervous. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only flaw in otherwise perfect features. He studied her with those winter gray eyes, and Lena felt dissected, catalogued, assessed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena. Lena Cross." "How long have you worked here, Lena Cross?" 4 months. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She clasped them behind her back, trying to hide the tremor. "I'm sorry. I haven't been sleeping well. My mother she died 3 weeks ago, and I haven't been—" "Focused," Victor finished. "Not a question. A diagnosis. You're exhausted, grieving, probably not eating properly, definitely not sleeping. You're running on fumes and desperation, and it shows." The accuracy of it knocked the air from her lungs. Lena stared at him, the stranger who'd summarized her entire life in 3 sentences. Victor stood. Champagne dripped from his jacket. He unbuttoned it smoothly, shrugged out of the ruined garment, and dropped it on his chair. Beneath it, his white shirt clung to his chest, soaked through and nearly transparent. He didn't seem to notice or care. "Gentlemen," he said to the 3 men at his table, not looking at them. "We're done here. Marco, have my car brought around. Dimitri, handle the bill. Thomas, make sure Ms. Cross isn't fired for this unfortunate accident." The men moved immediately, no questions asked. Within seconds, Lena was alone with Victor Moreau in the private dining room, Christmas lights twinkling mockingly through the windows behind him, carolers singing somewhere distant and cheerful. Victor pulled a card from his wallet and held it out to her. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. This address. Don't be late. Lena didn't take the card. Why? Because I'm giving you a chance to fix this. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne barely masked by champagne. You owe me, Lena Cross, but I'm not interested in your money or your job. I'm interested in your desperation. The words should have terrified her. Instead, something flickered in her chest, a dangerous, reckless spark of hope. I don't understand. You will. He tucked the card into her apron pocket himself, his fingers not quite touching her. 2 o'clock. Don't disappoint me twice. Then he was gone, leaving her standing in a puddle of champagne and shattered sugar, holding a business card that felt like a contract with the devil himself. Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat in her studio apartment, barely bigger than a closet, heat uncertain, walls thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments, and stared at Victor Moreau's card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, just an address in the city's most exclusive neighborhood and a time. She should throw it away, should recognize this for what it obviously was: trouble. Men like Victor Moreau didn't help people like her. They used them, consumed them, left them worse than they found them. But Lena was already worse, already drowning, already so far past desperate that reckless was starting to look like the only option left. At midnight, her landlord shoved an eviction notice under her door. 72 hours to pay or get out. At 1 a.m., she checked her bank account. Negative $43. At 2 a.m., she admitted the truth. She had nothing left to lose. When dawn broke cold and gray over the city, Lena was already awake. She showered in water that ran lukewarm at best, dressed in the only professional clothes she owned, black slacks with a worn knee, a white blouse that had seen better years. She looked exactly like what she was: poor, tired, desperate. Victor Moreau would see right through any attempt to pretend otherwise. The address on his card led to a building Lena had walked past 100 times but never entered. Luxury condos that occupied an entire city block, the kind of place with doormen and marble lobbies and monthly costs higher than yearly salaries. She stood outside for 5 full minutes, gathering courage, before forcing herself through the revolving doors. The doorman took one look at her and frowned. Can I help you? I have an appointment. Victor Moreau. 2 o'clock. The man's expression shifted immediately. Surprise, then careful neutrality. He picked up a phone, murmured something, listened. When he hung up, his demeanor had changed entirely. Penthouse, private elevator. 3rd one from the left. The elevator required a key card, which the doorman provided with a deference that made Lena's skin prickle. As the doors closed and the elevator began its silent ascent, she caught her reflection in the polished brass. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a ghost. Maybe that was appropriate. Maybe she'd died somewhere in the last 3 weeks and just hadn't noticed yet. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that stole Lena's breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Minimalist furniture that probably cost more than cars. Art on the walls that looked original, important. Everything was white and gray and silver. Cold colors, expensive colors, colors that didn't forgive. Victor stood by the windows, silhouetted against the winter cityscape, hands in his pockets. He'd changed into a dark sweater and slacks, casual but still immaculate. When he turned, his gray eyes found her immediately. You came, he said, not surprised, satisfied. You knew I would. Yes. He gestured to a white leather sofa. Sit. Lena sat. The leather was butter soft, probably more valuable than everything she owned combined. Victor remained standing, and she realized the power dynamic was deliberate. Him above, her below. The terms clear from the start. I'm going to make you an offer, Victor said. You're going to want to refuse it. You're going to think it's too dangerous, too strange, too much. But before you say no, I want you to consider your alternatives. He pulled a folder from a side table and dropped it on the coffee table between them. I know everything about you, Lena Cross. Everything. She stared at the folder, dread pooling in her stomach. I know about your mother's cancer, Victor continued, his voice clinical. The medical bills, the debt collectors. I know you're 3 months behind on rent with an eviction notice pending. I know you maxed out 4 credit cards, keeping her comfortable in her final weeks. I know you have $17 in checking, no savings, no family, no backup plan. He paused. I know you're drowning, and I know you're too proud to ask for help, but too desperate to refuse it. Lena's hands clenched in her lap. Why do you know all this? Because I needed to understand who you are before I made this offer. Victor moved to the window, his back to her now, silhouette sharp against the gray sky. I need a wife. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lena laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. What? Not a real wife, Victor clarified, still not looking at her. A performance. My family is traditional, powerful, demanding. They've been pressuring me to marry for years, produce an heir, secure the bloodline. All the things families like mine obsess over. His tone carried the weight of old arguments, old wounds. I've refused. I have no interest in their machinations or their approved matches. But my grandfather is dying. He turned then, and something flickered across his face. Too fast for Lena to name, but it looked like pain. He has months at most, Victor said quietly, and his final wish is to see me married, not to approve my choice of bride, just to know the line continues, that I'm not alone. He crossed to the sofa, sat on the opposite end, close enough that Lena could see the scar through his eyebrow in detail. I could refuse him. I probably should, but I owe him everything. He raised me when my father died, taught me how to survive in our world, how to lead, how to be ruthless when necessary and merciful when possible. Victor's jaw tightened. I owe him this one thing. Lena's mind raced, trying to process. You want to hire me to pretend to be your wife? For 5 days, Victor confirmed. Christmas through New Year's. My family gathers at the ancestral estate every year. You would come with me, play the devoted wife. Convince my grandfather that I've found someone. Give him peace before he dies. And then what? I just disappear? Then you get paid, enough to clear all your debts. First and last month on a new apartment, 6 months of living expenses to get back on your feet, a clean slate. The numbers hit Lena like a physical force. Freedom, survival, a chance to breathe without drowning. It was everything she needed, everything she'd been praying for in the dark hours when desperation turned to bargaining. There has to be a catch, she whispered. Victor's smile was cold and knowing. Of course there is. My family is dangerous, Lena. Not dangerous like street criminals, dangerous like old money and older secrets. Dangerous like power that's been consolidated over generations. They're not good people. They're strategic, calculating, and they will test you. They will try to find cracks in the story. They will push boundaries. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. And there will be one unbreakable rule. What rule? You are never to be alone with any male member of my family. Not my brothers, not my cousins, not my uncles. Never. The intensity in his voice made Lena's pulse quicken. Why? Because I know these men. I grew up with them. I've seen what they do when they think they have power over someone vulnerable. Victor's expression hardened to something dark and dangerous. You will be playing my wife, which means you're under my protection. But that protection only works if you follow this rule. Stay in public spaces. Stay within sight. If any of them try to isolate you, you refuse. If they persist, you find me immediately. Lena's throat felt dry. What happens if I break the rule? I can't guarantee your safety, Victor said simply. And I will not be held responsible for the consequences. The word should have sent her running, should have made her stand up, thank him for his time, and walk out of this sterile penthouse back into her broke, desperate, but familiar life. Instead, Lena thought about the eviction notice, the debt collectors, the empty refrigerator, the suffocating feeling of drowning slowly, one bill at a time, one failure after another. How much? She asked. Victor named a number that made her dizzy. That's... Lena couldn't even process it. That's too much. That's what you're worth to me, Victor corrected. 5 days of your time. 5 days of convincing performance. One rule followed absolutely. In exchange, you get your life back. He stood, crossed to a desk, and returned with papers. This is the contract. Read it carefully. All the terms are outlined. Payment schedule, expectations, consequences for breach. Lena took the contract with shaking hands. The paper was thick, expensive. The language was clear, almost brutally so. She would act as Victor Moreau's wife from December 25th through December 30th. She would attend all family functions, sleep in his quarters, maintain the fiction completely. She would follow all instructions given by Victor himself regarding appropriate behavior, dress, and conversation. And she would never, under any circumstances, be alone with his brothers Adrian or Marcus, his cousins Damien or Elias, his uncle Constantine. The consequences for breaking that rule were outlined in clinical detail: immediate termination of contract, forfeiture of all payment, and, the phrase that made Lena's blood run cold, release from all protections afforded by association with Victor Moreau. What does that mean? Lena pointed to the phrase. Release from protections? Victor's expression was unreadable. It means if you break the rule, you're on your own. I won't intervene. I won't save you. Whatever happens, happens. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Victor pulled a pen from his pocket and set it on the coffee table. You have two options, Lena. Sign this contract and solve all your problems in 5 days, or walk away and face your creditors, your landlord, and your future alone. He checked his watch. I need an answer in the next 5 minutes. After that, the offer expires. Lena stared at the contract, at the pen, at the man who'd somehow mapped her entire desperate situation and turned it into leverage. 5 days. One rule. A price that felt like salvation. She thought about her mother's final words, whispered in the hospice with morphine softening the edges. Be smart, baby. Be strong. Do what you have to do to survive. Lena picked up the pen. I need to know one thing first, she said, pen hovering over the signature line. Why me? You could hire an actress, a professional, someone trained for this kind of deception. Why a broke waitress who spilled champagne on you? Victor considered her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something almost human beneath the ice. Because they would be acting, he said finally. You'll be surviving. There's a difference. My family can smell a performance from a mile away. But desperation? Desperation is real. Desperation is convincing. He tilted his head slightly. And because when you looked at me last night, terrified and broke and cornered, you didn't beg. You didn't cry. You apologized once and then waited for judgment. That takes a kind of strength my family will recognize. Or it takes having nothing left to lose. Sometimes those are the same thing. Lena looked down at the contract one more time. 5 days. One rule. A stranger's world and a stranger's name. She signed. The ink was dark against the paper, her signature looking small and uncertain next to the bold printed terms. Victor took the contract immediately, added his own signature with a flourish that spoke of practice, and tucked it into the folder. We start tomorrow, he said. Christmas Day. A car will pick you up at 8 a.m. Bring nothing. Everything you need will be provided. Nothing? Lena stood, suddenly unsteady. I should bring clothes at least, or... Nothing, Victor repeated firmly. You're not going as Lena Cross, broke waitress. You're going as Lena Moreau, my wife. Everything, clothes, jewelry, identity, will be provided. You'll be given a complete background, a story, a role to play. He guided her toward the elevator with a hand that didn't quite touch her lower back, hovering just close enough to direct without contact. Tonight, get some sleep, real sleep, eat a proper meal. Tomorrow, your old life ends and this one begins. The elevator doors opened. Lena stepped inside, then turned. Victor, she said, using his first name for the first time. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not convincing enough? His gray eyes held hers, and for just a moment she saw something beneath the ice, a flash of understanding, maybe even sympathy. Then we both lose, he said simply. But I don't think you will. Survival makes us all better actors than we know. The doors closed on his face, and Lena was descending, the contract signed, her fate sealed, Christmas Eve becoming Christmas morning somewhere in the hours she hadn't noticed passing. She walked out of the building into winter air that bit at her exposed skin, and for the first time in months, Lena Cross felt something other than desperation. She felt terror. Pure, crystalline, absolute terror. And beneath it, barely acknowledged, a tiny spark of something that might have been excitement. The car arrived at exactly 8 a.m. Lena had been awake since 5, unable to sleep despite Victor's instructions. She'd showered, dressed in her same worn clothes, not knowing what else to do, and waited by the window of her studio apartment, watching the street below. When the black Mercedes pulled up, sleek and expensive and utterly out of place in her shabby neighborhood, Lena's heart kicked into overdrive. A man in a black suit emerged. Tall, built like a wall, with the kind of alert posture that screamed security. He looked up at her window as if he knew exactly which one was hers, and raised a hand in greeting. Lena grabbed her purse, containing nothing but her ID, keys, and the $17 to her name, and headed downstairs. The security man opened the car door for her without speaking. Lena slid into leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and found Victor waiting inside. He looked different in daylight. Still severe, still handsome in that cold way, but somehow more real. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been made for his body, which it probably had. And he was reading something on his phone with focused intensity. "Good morning," Lena said, unsure of the protocol. Victor glanced up, and his eyes traveled over her systematically. "You're on time. Good." He pocketed his phone and knocked on the divider. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. "We have about an hour's drive to the estate. I'm going to use that time to prepare you." "Prepare me how?" Victor pulled out a tablet and handed it to her. On the screen was a photograph of a young woman who looked nothing like Lena. Blonde, polished, smiling with the kind of confidence that came from money and security. "This is Isabelle Laurent," Victor said. "She's the woman my family thinks I've been seeing for the past 8 months. Corporate lawyer, well-educated, well-connected, sophisticated." Lena stared at the photograph, then at herself. Dark hair, no polish, no confidence. "I look nothing like her." "No," Victor agreed. "But my family has never met her. I've kept my personal life deliberately private. They know of Isabel only through carefully managed mentions in conversation. What matters is that you can embody the type of woman I would marry." "And what type is that?" "Intelligent, composed, capable of holding your own in conversation without being aggressive, educated enough to discuss art, literature, politics, but not so educated that you threaten the men's egos." Victor's tone was matter-of-fact, and Lena realized he was describing a performance he'd clearly studied. "You're confident but not arrogant, affectionate with me but not inappropriately so in public. You're aware of your place in the family hierarchy, new, untested, but under my protection." Lena's head spun. "You want me to be sophisticated, educated, confident, and deferential all at once?" "I want you to be smart enough to read the room and adapt." Victor swiped to the next screen, which showed a family tree. "These are the people you'll meet. Study them." For the next 40 minutes, Victor walked Lena through his family with the clinical precision of a military briefing. His grandfather, Constantine Moreau, 83, dying, the patriarch whose word was law. His grandmother, Ekaterina, deceased 5 years, still spoken of in reverent tones. His father, Alexei, dead 9 years, killed in what Victor described flatly as a business dispute that was resolved. His 2 younger brothers, Adrian, 25, and Marcus, 23, both involved in the family business in ways Victor didn't elaborate on. His uncle Constantine, his father's younger brother, 51, bitter about not inheriting, dangerous when drunk. Various cousins, most of them men, most of them described with warnings about their behavior, their ambitions, their lack of boundaries. "The women in the family are mostly wives or daughters," Victor explained. "They'll assess you differently, looking for weakness, for evidence you're not good enough, for reasons to reject you." He paused. "Don't give them any." "How do I do that?" "By being so unremarkable they can't find fault. Polite but not eager. Interested but not intrusive. You're there to support me, not to make friends or impress anyone." Lena absorbed this, her anxiety building with each new rule, each new name. "Victor, I'm a waitress from a bad neighborhood who barely finished community college. I don't know how to—" "You know how to serve people," Victor interrupted. You know how to read a room, anticipate needs, navigate difficult personalities without causing offense. Those skills translate. He met her eyes. And you know how to survive. That's more valuable than any education. The car turned off the highway onto a private road. Trees grew thick on either side, bare branches creating a tunnel effect. Lena's pulse quickened. "One more thing," Victor said, and his voice carried a new weight. "The ring." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring that stole Lena's breath, platinum band with a square-cut diamond so large it seemed obscene. Smaller stones surrounded it, catching the winter light and throwing rainbow fractals across the car's interior. "This was my grandmother's," Victor said quietly. "My grandfather had it specially commissioned when they married. It's been waiting for my wife." Lena stared at it, unable to move. "I can't wear that. If I lost it, you won't lose it." Victor took her left hand, the first time he'd actually touched her. His fingers were warm, steady. "It's insured, and it needs to be on your hand when we arrive. My grandfather will look for it." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, heavy and foreign and terrifying. Lena watched it catch the light. This symbol of a lie she'd agreed to tell, and felt the weight of what she'd done settle over her like a shroud. "There," Victor said, releasing her hand. "Now you look like my wife." The car emerged from the trees, and Lena's breath caught. The Moreau estate spread before them like something from another century. A massive stone mansion that looked more like a castle, surrounded by manicured grounds now dusted with snow. Outbuildings that were probably larger than normal homes. Gardens that must have been spectacular in summer, now sleeping beneath winter's grip. And cars. So many expensive cars parked in the circular drive. Her new family waiting inside. "Remember," Victor said as the car stopped. "Never alone with the men. Follow my lead. Trust no one." He paused, and something flickered in his expression. "If this becomes too much, if you need to leave, you tell me immediately. I won't force you to stay if you're genuinely unsafe." "I thought breaking the contract meant forfeiting payment." "It does. But I'm not a monster, Lena. If you're in actual danger, money becomes irrelevant." The driver opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and snow and wood smoke. Lena could see faces in the mansion's windows, watching. Victor stepped out first, then offered his hand. When Lena took it, he pulled her close. Not quite an embrace, but intimate enough to look natural. His breath was warm against her ear. "Showtime," he whispered. Then he was leading her up the stone steps to the massive oak doors, and Lena Cross, now Lena Moreau, at least for 5 days, stepped into a gilded cage wearing a dead woman's ring and a borrowed name, unsure whether she was being protected or controlled, saved or damned. The doors opened, and the Moreau family waited inside. Let the performance begin. The mansion swallowed them whole. That was Lena's first thought as the oak doors closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, reflecting the light from a chandelier so massive it looked like it could crush a person. Oil paintings lined the walls, stern faces from generations past, all watching with the same cold assessment she could feel from the living people gathered in the adjoining room. Victor's hand tightened on hers, a brief pressure that might have been reassurance or warning. Then he was moving forward, and Lena had no choice but to follow, the dead woman's ring heavy on her finger, her heart hammering against her ribs. They entered a sitting room decorated for Christmas, with the kind of restrained elegance that made the holiday feel more like a board meeting. A massive tree stood in the corner, decorated entirely in silver and white. No tinsel, no mess, no warmth, just perfect cold beauty. And gathered around it, the Moreau family. "Victor." The voice came from a chair by the fireplace, where an old man sat wrapped in blankets despite the heat radiating from the flames. Constantine Moreau. Even dying, even diminished by illness, he commanded the room with his presence. Sharp eyes and a face carved by time and power, white hair swept back from a forehead that had probably intimidated generations. "You're late." "Traffic," Victor said smoothly, no apology in his tone. "Grandfather, I'd like you to meet Isabel." Every eye in the room turned to Lena. She felt the weight of their assessment like physical pressure, judging, calculating, finding her wanting before she'd even spoken. But she'd waited tables for years. She knew how to smile under scrutiny. "Mr. Moreau," she said, moving forward with her hand extended. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Victor speaks of you constantly." Constantine didn't take her hand. Instead, he studied her with eyes that missed nothing. Her cheap shoes, the way her clothes didn't quite fit right, the tension in her shoulders. Lena felt naked under that gaze, every lie exposed. Then his eyes dropped to her left hand, to the ring. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a softening around the edges. "Ekaterina's ring," he said quietly. I wondered if Victor would ever give it to anyone. His gaze snapped back to Victor. "You're serious about this girl." It wasn't a question, but Victor answered anyway. "I wouldn't have brought her here otherwise." "No," Constantine agreed. "You wouldn't." Finally, he extended his hand to Lena. When she took it, his grip was surprisingly strong for a dying man. "Welcome to the family, Isabel. I hope you know what you're getting into." "I'm learning," Lena said, and something in her honest tone must have pleased him because Constantine's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "At least you're not an idiot." He released her hand and gestured to the room. "Well, are the rest of you going to stand there gawking, or will someone offer the girl a drink?" Movement erupted. A woman in her 40s approached with a glass of champagne, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm Svetlana," she said, "Constantine's wife. We're so pleased Victor finally decided to share you with us." The emphasis on "finally" carried barbs Lena couldn't quite identify. "Victor values his privacy," Lena said carefully, accepting the champagne. "As do I." How convenient. This came from a younger man who'd positioned himself near the fireplace, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Adrian, Victor's younger brother. Lena recognized him from the briefing, 25, ambitious, dangerous. He had Victor's coloring but none of his control. Where Victor was ice, Adrian was fire barely banked. A girlfriend no one's met, a relationship no one can verify. Very mysterious. "Adrian." Victor's voice carried a warning that made Adrian's smile sharpen. "I'm just saying, brother, 8 months and not a single family dinner? Not one introduction? Makes a person wonder what you were hiding." Adrian's eyes traveled over Lena in a way that made her skin crawl. "Though I can see the appeal now." "Adrian." This time the warning was darker, edged with something that made the room temperature drop. Lena felt the tension coil between the brothers, saw the rest of the family watching with the avid interest of people who'd seen this play before and knew how it ended. She thought about Victor's rule, never alone with the men, and realized Adrian was already testing boundaries, right here in front of everyone. "It's all right," Lena said, stepping slightly closer to Victor. The movement was instinctive, seeking protection, but it played well. She felt Victor's arm come around her waist, claiming and sheltering in one gesture. "I understand the skepticism. If my positions were reversed, I'd be questioning too. Victor's family is important to him. It makes sense you'd want to protect him." The words were perfect. Understanding without weakness, acknowledgement without apology. Lena saw approval flicker across several faces, including Constantine's. Adrian, however, just smiled wider. "Diplomatic. I like that." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Welcome to the family, Isabel. I have a feeling this week is going to be very interesting." The rest of the introductions passed in a blur. Marcus, the youngest brother, quieter than Adrian but no less watchful. Various cousins whose names Lena tried desperately to memorize. Uncle Constantine, who looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't wait to solve or break. More wives, more children, more Moreaus than Lena had prepared for, all of them watching her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Through it all, Victor remained at her side, his presence a shield and a reminder. His hand stayed at her waist or tangled with hers, the touches light but constant, playing the devoted husband, protecting his investment. When dinner was announced, Lena felt relief so profound it made her dizzy. Surely a meal would be easier, structured, with rules, with breaks in the conversation. She'd never been more wrong. The dining room was even more intimidating than the sitting room. A table that could seat 30, set with china so delicate Lena was afraid to touch it. Crystal that caught the candlelight and threw it back in dazzling patterns. Silver that probably cost more than her entire life before this moment. Victor pulled out her chair, to his right, placing her between him and the head of the table where Constantine presided. A position of honor and exposure. So, Isabel. Svetlana sat across from them, her smile sharp. Victor mentioned you're a lawyer. What kind of law? Lena's mind went blank. Victor had said corporate law in the briefing, but the specifics, what had he said? The words scattered like startled birds, and she felt panic rising. Corporate contracts, Victor said smoothly, his hand finding hers under the table. A quick squeeze, steadying, grounding. Mergers and acquisitions, mostly. Very dry stuff. She's been complaining about a case all month, haven't you, darling? The endearment rolled off his tongue like he'd said it 1,000 times. Lena forced herself to breathe, to follow his lead. Endless paperwork, she agreed, finding her footing. I've been telling Victor I should have gone into criminal law like I originally planned. At least that would be exciting. Criminal law, Marcus spoke up from down the table. Why didn't you? Money, Lena said honestly, then realized that might be too honest. But the admission seemed to please Constantine. Practical, the old man said. Passion doesn't pay bills. What did your family think of the career change? The question hit Lena like a fist. Her family. Her mother, dead 3 weeks. Her father, gone since she was 12. No siblings, no cousins, no one. My parents are dead, she said, and the rawness in her voice was completely real. So I made the decision myself. Silence fell across the table. Lena felt Victor's thumb stroke across her knuckles, a gesture so subtle she almost missed it. I'm sorry, Constantine said, and he sounded like he meant it. That's a hard thing, being alone in the world. I'm not alone anymore, Lena said, looking at Victor. The lie tasted bitter, but she sold it with her eyes, with the grief that was all too real. I have Victor now. Something passed between them in that moment, a flicker of connection that wasn't entirely performance. Victor's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and when he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the gesture felt less like acting and more like acknowledgement. Lucky Victor, Adrian said, breaking the moment. His tone was mocking, but his eyes were serious, calculating. Finding someone so conveniently without family ties. No complicated in-laws to deal with, no messy obligations. Adrian, Marcus's voice this time quieter but firm. Enough. What? I'm just saying it's fortunate, no offense intended. Adrian spread his hands in innocence that fooled no one. The meal continued, courses appearing and disappearing with silent efficiency. Lena picked at food she couldn't taste, hyper-aware of every word, every glance, every test disguised as conversation. The family probed and pushed questions about how she and Victor met. At a charity gala, Victor supplied smoothly. How long before he proposed? 6 months, Lena said, remembering the timeline. Whether they planned to have children soon. That question came from one of the cousins' wives, young and pregnant, and clearly delighted by the discomfort it caused. Eventually, Victor said before Lena could answer, we're in no rush. But you're not getting younger, Svetlana pointed out. And Constantine would love to see great-grandchildren before... She stopped, the unfinished sentence hanging heavy. Before he dies. That's what she meant. Before the man at the head of the table, still sharp despite his illness, left them all to fight over his empire. We'll have children when we're ready, Lena said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Not according to anyone else's timeline. The table went quiet again. Then Constantine laughed, a dry, rattling sound that was still somehow genuine. She's got spine, he said to Victor. I like her. So do I, Victor said quietly, and the way he looked at Lena in that moment made her forget how to breathe. After dinner, the family migrated back to the sitting room for drinks and dessert. Lena felt exhaustion pulling at her, the strain of constant performance wearing through her adrenaline. She wanted nothing more than to escape, to find somewhere quiet and breathe without being watched. I should show you to our room, Victor murmured in her ear. You look tired. Lena nodded gratefully, but before they could move, Adrian appeared at her elbow. Before you disappear, he said, smile charming and eyes cold. I wanted to show Isabel the gallery. We have some incredible pieces she might appreciate, given her interest in art. I never said I was interested in art, Lena said carefully. Didn't you? Adrian's eyebrows rose. I could have sworn you mentioned it at dinner. Maybe I misheard. He hadn't misheard. She'd never said anything about art. This was a test, a trap, a deliberate move to isolate her. Never alone with the men. Victor's rule echoed in her mind. The gallery sounds wonderful, Lena said smoothly. Victor, would you mind giving me the tour? I'd love to see it with you. Adrian's smile tightened. I'm sure Victor's seen it 1,000 times. Besides, he and grandfather need to discuss some business. Don't you? He looked at Victor with challenge clear in his expression. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Lena could feel the tension radiating from him, could sense the impossible position Adrian had created. Refuse, and it looked like Victor didn't trust his own brother. Agree. And Lena would be alone with Adrian in violation of the one rule that mattered. Actually, Marcus appeared beside them, smooth and unexpected. I was just heading to the gallery myself. I'll walk with Isabel. You two can handle whatever business needs handling. The offer was casual, but Lena saw the look that passed between the brothers. Some old dynamic, some family politics she didn't understand. Adrian's expression flickered with annoyance, but he couldn't refuse without making it obvious. Perfect, Victor said, but his eyes held a warning when they met Lena's. Don't keep her too long. She's had a long day. Marcus offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Lena took it, feeling Victor's gaze follow them as Marcus led her from the room. She glanced back once and saw him watching, his expression unreadable, as Adrian said something that made his hands curl into fists. Then they were in the corridor, and Lena was alone with one of the men she'd been warned about. The gallery was in the east wing, down a corridor lined with more portraits of dead Moreaus. Marcus walked in silence, and Lena tried to remember what Victor had said about him. 23, quieter than Adrian, involved in the family business in ways not specified. Dangerous? All of them were dangerous. You handled Adrian well, Marcus said finally, as they entered a long room with paintings covering every wall. He likes to push boundaries, see what people are made of. I noticed. Lena kept her voice neutral, her distance careful. Victor told you the rule, didn't he? Marcus stopped in front of a landscape, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. Never alone with the men. Lena's heart kicked into overdrive. I don't know what you mean. Please. Marcus turned to face her, and his eyes were sharper than his easy manner suggested. I'm Victor's brother. You think he doesn't tell us things? He was very clear. His new wife is off limits. No one touches her, no one tests her, no one makes her uncomfortable. He smiled slightly. Adrian was already breaking that rule at dinner. Then why did you bring me here? Lena's hand moved instinctively to her purse, though what she thought she could do against a Moreau, she had no idea. Because if I hadn't, Adrian would have found another way, and whatever he has planned, it's better it happens with me here than him alone. Marcus gestured to the paintings. These are worth millions. Some of them are stolen. Most have blood on them, figuratively, some literally. Every piece of beauty in this house was bought with violence or deception. He looked at her directly. I'm telling you this so you understand what family you've married into. I know what Victor does, Lena said carefully. Do you? Marcus moved closer, not threatening, but intent. Do you know what we all do? What's required to maintain this empire? The things we've seen, the things we've done. Marcus. The voice came from the doorway, sharp, commanding. Victor stood there, and his expression was darker than Lena had ever seen it. Step away from my wife. We were just talking, Marcus said mildly, not moving. I don't care. Victor crossed the room in 3 strides and positioned himself between them. You don't talk to her without me present. You don't show her paintings. You don't do anything except nod politely when you pass her in the halls. Are we clear? Crystal. Marcus raised his hands in surrender, but his eyes held something like respect when he looked at Victor. I was actually trying to help. Adrian's planning something, thought she should be warned. Victor's jaw tightened. What kind of something? The kind where he proves she's not who she says she is. Marcus glanced at Lena. He doesn't believe the story. He's going to test her. He moved toward the door, paused. I like her, Victor. She's got more steel than you usually go for. But if she can't handle Adrian, this week is going to get very ugly. Then he was gone, leaving them alone in a gallery full of stolen beauty and violence. Victor turned to Lena, and the fury in his eyes made her step back. What did he say to you? His voice was low, controlled, but vibrating with anger. Did he touch you? No, he warned me about Adrian, said he's planning something. Of course he is. Victor ran a hand through his hair, the first time Lena had seen him show anything like agitation. Adrian always plans something. He can't help himself. The need to prove he's smarter, stronger, better. He looked at Lena, really looked at her, and some of the anger faded into concern. Are you all right? I'm fine. Marcus didn't do anything wrong. He actually seemed like he was trying to help. Marcus is never trying to help, Victor said flatly. He's the most dangerous one because he makes you think he's safe. Adrian's obvious. You see the threat coming. Marcus is subtle. He gets inside your head, makes you trust him, and then uses that trust against you. He took her hand, the gesture now familiar after hours of performance. Don't trust any of them. Not Adrian, not Marcus, not the cousins. Only me. Do you understand? Lena nodded, but something in her rebelled against the absolute certainty in his voice. Victor, they're your family. Exactly. The word was bitter. I know them better than anyone, and I'm telling you, they're dangerous. He softened slightly, thumb brushing over her knuckles where the ring sat heavy. I know this is a lot. I know it's terrifying, but you just have to make it through 5 days. 5 days, and you never have to see any of them again. 5 days. It felt like an eternity. Victor led her through more corridors, up a grand staircase to the second floor where the family quarters were located. He stopped at a door near the end of the hall and pulled out a key. This is us, he said, opening it. The room beyond was enormous. A suite, really, with a sitting area, a massive 4-poster bed, and windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. A fire crackled in the fireplace. Someone had unpacked clothes Lena had never seen. Dresses, shoes, everything in exactly her size. How did you... she started. I had your measurements from the restaurant uniform, Victor said. The clothes were delivered this morning while we were driving here. He gestured to a door. That's the bathroom. You'll find everything you need. I'll sleep on the couch. Lena looked at the massive bed, then at the couch, which was beautiful but far too small for Victor's frame. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. The deal was you play my wife, not that you share my bed. His voice was firm, no room for argument. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder. Harder than today? Much. Victor moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. Tomorrow is Christmas. Family breakfast, present exchange, dinner. Hours of sustained performance with nowhere to hide. He was quiet for a moment. And Adrian will make his move. Whatever he's planning, it'll be tomorrow, when there are too many witnesses for me to handle it quietly. Lena's stomach twisted. What do I do? Follow the rule. Stay near me. If anyone tries to separate us, you refuse. If you feel unsafe, you tell me immediately. He turned from the window, and his expression was unreadable. And if it becomes too much, if you want to leave, you say the word, and I'll get you out. Contract be damned. The offer was genuine. Lena could hear it in his voice, and somehow that made it worse, made her feel more trapped than if he'd threatened her. I'm not leaving, she said. I made a deal. I'll see it through. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Respect maybe, or concern. Stubborn. Desperate, Lena corrected. You said it yourself. Desperation makes us all better actors. I did say that. Victor moved toward the couch, started removing his jacket. Get some sleep, Lena. Tomorrow, the real test begins. The use of her real name, not Isabel, not his wife, but Lena, made her throat tighten. She retreated to the bathroom before he could see the emotion on her face. The bathroom was marble and gold and excessive. Lena found pajamas laid out, silk, expensive. Nothing like the worn t-shirts she usually slept in. She changed mechanically, washed her face, stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, wearing dead woman's clothes, dead woman's ring, living a dead woman's life for 5 days. Except it wasn't a dead woman's life. It was Victor's life. And she was just a visitor, a hired actress in a play that felt less like performance with every passing hour. When she emerged, Victor was already on the couch, still half-dressed, staring at the ceiling. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines, making him look younger, more human. "Victor," Lena said quietly. He turned his head, eyes finding her in the darkness. "Thank you for the warning, for protecting me." She hesitated. "For being honest about how dangerous this is." "I'm not a good man, Lena," Victor said, voice rough. "Don't make the mistake of thinking I am just because I'm keeping you safe. I have my own reasons for that." "What reasons?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I don't want to be like them. Like my father, my uncle, my brothers. I don't want to be the kind of man who uses desperate people and discards them." He sat up, elbows on his knees, face half-shadowed. "You needed help. I needed a wife. It's a transaction, but that doesn't mean I have to be cruel about it." Lena crossed to the bed, slipped under covers that smelled like lavender and money. "Your grandfather seems to really care about you." "He does. In his way." Victor's voice carried old pain, old complications. "He's a monster who loves his family. It's possible to be both." "Are you?" The question slipped out before Lena could stop it. "A monster who loves his family?" Victor looked at her across the firelit room, and his smile was sad and knowing. "Ask me again in 5 days. If you're still here, you'll have your answer." Then he lay back down, turning his face away, and the conversation was over. Lena lay in the massive bed, staring at the canopy above her, and listened to the old house settle around them. Somewhere distant, she heard voices. The family still awake, still talking, still watching and judging. Tomorrow, they'd do it all again. Tomorrow, Adrian would make his move. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But tonight, in this firelit room with a stranger on the couch who'd promised to protect her, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. It was an illusion, she knew. Safety was just another lie in a house built on violence and stolen beauty. But for tonight, she let herself believe it. Tomorrow would bring its own truths. Tonight, she slept. Christmas morning arrived with cruelty disguised as beauty. Snow falling soft outside the windows, light filtering through in shades of pearl and silver, and the suffocating knowledge that Lena had to survive an entire day of performance without breaking. She woke to find Victor already dressed, standing by the window with coffee in hand, his silhouette sharp against the winter brightness. He didn't turn when she stirred, but his voice carried across the room with quiet certainty. "Breakfast is in 30 minutes. I had clothes laid out for you, something appropriate for a family Christmas." He paused, took a sip of coffee. "Adrian cornered Marcus last night, asked questions about you, about inconsistencies in your story." Lena sat up, heart already racing. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Small things. The way you held your champagne glass at dinner, too careful, like someone not used to expensive crystal. The fact that you knew nothing about the art in the gallery when supposedly you discussed it earlier. The way your eyes went distant when Svetlana asked about children." Victor finally turned, and his expression was unreadable. He's looking for cracks. Today, he'll push harder. "What do I do?" "Stay close to me. Answer questions with questions when you can. If you don't know something, admit ignorance instead of lying badly." Victor set down his coffee and crossed to where she sat, tangled in sheets that cost more than her former monthly rent. "And remember, you're my wife. That means you're under my protection, but it also means you reflect on me. Every mistake you make is ammunition Adrian can use to undermine my authority with the family." The weight of that settled over Lena like a physical thing. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was a weapon in a war she didn't fully understand. "Victor," she said quietly, "what happens if I fail? What happens to you?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprised maybe that she'd thought to ask. "Nothing I can't handle. My position in the family isn't dependent on whether I have a wife, but it would be—" He searched for the word embarrassing. to have my choices questioned, to look weak. Lena understood weakness, understood how it felt to be exposed, vulnerable, judged. She threw back the covers and stood, meeting his eyes directly. "I won't make you look weak." "No," Victor said, and there was something like respect in his voice. "I don't think you will." The dress he'd chosen for her was deep green velvet, fitted but not tight, elegant without being ostentatious. Lena found undergarments, still in packaging, shoes that fit perfectly, even jewelry, simple gold that wouldn't compete with the ring. Someone had thought of everything. She dressed in the bathroom, taking time with her appearance in a way she normally never did. Hair swept up to show her neck, minimal makeup that made her look polished instead of painted. When she emerged, Victor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You look like you belong here," he said. "That's the point, isn't it?" Lena smoothed the velvet over her hips, feeling like an imposter in someone else's skin. To make them believe the lie. It's not entirely a lie anymore. Victor moved closer, and Lena caught the scent of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. "You're here. You're wearing my grandmother's ring. You slept in my bed. The only fiction is that you chose it." The words hung between them, weighted with implications Lena didn't want to examine. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. "Victor," Marcus's voice, muffled but urgent. "Grandfather wants everyone downstairs. Now." Victor's jaw tightened. "We'll be right there." He offered Lena his arm, and she took it, feeling the muscle beneath his sleeve, the tension radiating through him. They walked in silence through corridors that seemed less grand in daylight, more like what they were, a gilded cage where predators circled and waited. The family had gathered in a different sitting room, this one centered around an enormous Christmas tree that touched the 12-foot ceiling. Presents spilled out beneath it in carefully wrapped abundance. But the atmosphere was wrong, strained, tense, everyone watching Constantine where he sat in his chair like a king on a throne. "There you are," the old man said when he saw them. His color was worse today, gray beneath the skin, but his eyes were still sharp. "I was beginning to think you'd decided to sleep through Christmas." "Never," Victor said smoothly. "We were just—" "I know what newlyweds do in the morning," Constantine interrupted, and scattered laughter rippled through the family. "Sit. I want to do presents before the nurse insists I rest." They sat on a sofa near the tree, and Lena felt every eye tracking their movements. Adrian lounged against the fireplace, watching them with undisguised interest. Marcus stood near the windows, arms crossed. The wives and cousins arranged themselves strategically, all angles covered, all exits monitored. The gift exchange was elaborate and uncomfortable. Expensive items passed between family members with the casual indifference of people who had too much money to truly appreciate any of it. Watches that cost more than cars, jewelry that required insurance riders, art, wine, promises of vacations to places Lena had only seen in magazines. When Constantine gestured to a small box near his chair, Victor tensed beside her. "For your bride," the old man said. "Since this is her first Christmas with the family." Victor retrieved the box and handed it to Lena with a look that conveyed both warning and apology. She opened it with shaking hands to find a necklace inside, antique diamonds and emeralds that caught the light, and threw it back in dazzling patterns. "It was a Katerina's," Constantine said softly. "She wore it on our wedding day. I want you to have it." The room went silent. Lena saw shock ripple across faces. This wasn't just expensive, it was significant. A family heirloom passed to an outsider they'd known less than 24 hours. A claiming, a blessing, a statement. "I can't," Lena whispered, staring at the necklace. "This is too much. You can and you will," Constantine said firmly. "Victor gave you a Katerina's ring. It's only right you have her necklace too." His eyes found Victor's. "Your grandmother would have liked this one. She had spine. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind." Victor's hand found Lena's knee beneath the cover of her skirt, squeezed once. Support or warning, she couldn't tell. "Thank you," Lena managed, her throat tight. "I'll treasure it, sure." "See that you do." Constantine settled back in his chair looking satisfied. "Now, who's next?" The exchange continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Constantine had publicly endorsed Lena, elevated her status within the family hierarchy. She saw it in the way the wives' expressions changed, still assessing, but now with grudging respect. Saw it in Adrian's narrowed eyes, the way his smile turned calculating. When breakfast was announced, the family moved to yet another dining room, this one flooded with winter light from floor to ceiling windows. The table was set for a feast, plates of pastries, fresh fruit, hot dishes that smelled like comfort and tasted like obligation. Lena sat beside Victor, the necklace heavy at her throat, and tried to navigate conversation that felt like walking through a minefield. Every question was a test, every answer an opportunity to fail. So, Isabel, one of the cousins' wives, Natasha, Lena thought, smiled from across the table. How did your family feel about you marrying into the Moreau family? Surely they had concerns about Victor's business interests. My parents are dead, Lena said, the truth easier than lies. So I made the decision myself. How convenient, Adrian murmured, just loud enough to be heard. No family to ask awkward questions. Adrian? Victor's voice carried a warning that made silverware clink as people shifted uncomfortably. What? I'm just observing that it's fortunate Isabel's family situation is so uncomplicated. Adrian leaned forward, eyes bright with malice. Tell me, when exactly did your parents die? Recently or 3 weeks ago, Lena said, and the rawness in her voice wasn't acting. My mother. Cancer. My father left when I was 12, so yes, it's convenient that I don't have to navigate complicated family dynamics. It's also devastating, but I suppose convenience matters more in families like this. The silence that followed was absolute. Lena saw something like sympathy flash across Marcus's face, saw Constantine nod slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Adrian, for once, had nothing to say. I'm sorry for your loss, Svetlana said finally, and she sounded almost genuine. Losing a parent is never easy, no matter the circumstances. The conversation moved on, but Lena felt Victor's hand find hers beneath the table, his fingers lacing through hers in a gesture that felt less like performance and more like solidarity. She squeezed back, grateful and terrified in equal measure. After breakfast, Constantine retired to rest, and the family scattered to various activities. Some went outside to walk the grounds despite the cold. Others retreated to the library or their rooms. Victor pulled Lena toward a conservatory she hadn't seen yet, all glass and winter light, filled with plants that shouldn't survive December but flourished anyway in their climate-controlled paradise. You did well, Victor said once they were alone among the greenery. Adrian tried to rattle you and you held firm. That's good. He's not going to stop, is he? Lena touched the necklace at her throat, feeling its weight. Whatever he's planning, losing one round won't discourage him. No, it'll make him more determined. Victor moved to a window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. Adrian has always needed to prove himself, being the middle brother, not quite heir material, but not young enough to be dismissed. He compensates by being ruthless, by finding weaknesses and exploiting them. What's my weakness? Lena asked. In his eyes, what's the crack he'll try to widen? Victor turned to face her, and his expression was complicated. That you're not really my wife, that this is all a performance. He can't prove it, not without access to records we've carefully buried, but he can make people doubt, can make Constantine question. And if Constantine starts questioning my judgment, my choices, it undermines everything. He paused. The way to counter that is to make the performance so convincing that doubt becomes impossible. How do we do that? Victor crossed to her slowly, deliberately, until he stood close enough that Lena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. We show them what they expect to see. Intimacy, connection, the kind of small gestures that can't be faked. His hand came up to cup her jaw, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Like this. A husband who can't help touching his wife. A wife who leans into the contact instead of flinching away. Lena's breath caught. The touch was gentle, almost tender, and her body responded without conscious thought, leaning in, eyes fluttering closed for just a moment before she caught herself. See? Victor's voice was soft. That's what sells it. The instinct. The body's memory of comfort. But we don't have that, Lena whispered. We barely know each other. Then we build it. Starting now. Victor's other hand settled at her waist, pulling her closer. I need you to stop thinking of me as your employer. Stop thinking of this as a transaction. When we're in public, when my family is watching, I need you to think of me as your husband, someone you chose, someone you trust. That's not acting anymore, Lena said. That's method. That's dangerous. Yes, Victor agreed, but it's necessary. Because Adrian will be watching for exactly this. The hesitation, the moment when you remember it's not real, and the second he sees it, he'll pounce. Lena understood the logic, understood the strategy, but standing this close to Victor Moreau, feeling the warmth of his body and the steadiness of his hands, she also understood how easy it would be to forget where the performance ended and reality began. Okay, she said. Show me. Show me what it should look like. Victor's eyes darkened. Are you sure? You said I need to learn, so teach me. For a moment, he just looked at her, something unreadable moving behind his gray eyes. Then he pulled her fully against him, one arm around her waist, the other hand sliding into her hair, tilting her face up. A husband who loves his wife doesn't ask permission, he said quietly. He takes moments when they present themselves. Like this. He leaned down, and Lena's heart hammered against her ribs as his lips brushed her forehead, her temple, the corner of her mouth. Not quite a kiss, but close enough that her breath came faster. Her hands came up to clutch his shoulders without conscious thought. And a wife who loves her husband, Victor continued, his breath warm against her skin, doesn't hold herself rigid. She softens, trusts, lets herself be held. Lena forced her muscles to relax, let her weight settle against him, and felt Victor's arms tighten in response. They stood like that in the winter light, wrapped around each other, and it felt so real Lena had to remind herself it wasn't. Good, Victor murmured against her hair. That's what they need to see. That's what will make Adrian's doubts look like jealousy instead of insight. A door opened somewhere in the house. Voices carried. Adrian's laugh, sharp and mocking, getting closer. Victor didn't let go. Instead, he shifted slightly, angling them so that when Adrian appeared in the conservatory doorway, he would see exactly what Victor wanted him to see, a couple wrapped in each other, intimate and undisturbed. Oh, Adrian said, stopping short when he spotted them. Sorry to interrupt. I was just looking for... He stopped, eyes narrowing as he took in their position, the way Lena's hands rested on Victor's chest, the way Victor's arms encircled her protectively. Actually, never mind. I can see you're busy. What do you want, Adrian? Victor didn't move, didn't release Lena, just turned his head slightly to regard his brother with cool disinterest. I was going to invite you both to join us for a walk. The grounds are beautiful in the snow, but clearly you have other priorities. Adrian's smile was all edges. Enjoy your privacy, while it lasts. He left, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Lena started to pull away, but Victor held her still. Wait, he might be watching. Give it another minute. So they stayed there, wrapped around each other, while Lena's heart raced and her mind spun. This was the job. This was what she'd agreed to. But it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like something else entirely, something that made her want things she had no right to want. Victor, she said finally, what happens when this is over, when the 5 days end and I go back to being Lena Cross? You go back to your life, Victor said simply. Debts paid, clean slate, everything we agreed on. And you forget I exist. He was quiet for a long moment, then, probably not, but I'll pretend to. It's what you'll want. How do you know what I'll want? Victor finally released her, stepping back, and the distance felt like cold water. Because no one actually wants this life, the violence, the suspicion, the constant performance. You're surviving it because you have to. But once you're free, you'll run and never look back. That's what smart people do. What if I'm not smart? The question slipped out before Lena could stop it. Victor's expression shifted, surprise, then something that might have been hope before he shuddered it. Then you're more dangerous than Adrian could ever be. Before Lena could parse that statement, voices erupted from somewhere in the house, shouting, urgent and angry. Victor's entire demeanor changed, tension flooding through him as he moved toward the door. "Stay here," he commanded. "What's happening?" "I don't know, but stay here until I come back." He was gone before Lena could argue, leaving her alone among the plants and winter light. She waited, heart pounding, listening to the muffled sounds of conflict from somewhere deeper in the mansion. 5 minutes passed. 10. Lena's anxiety built with each second of silence. Victor had said to stay put, but what if something was wrong? What if he needed help? What if this was exactly what Adrian wanted? Victor distracted, Lena alone and vulnerable. The thought had barely formed when the conservatory door opened again, but it wasn't Victor who entered. It was Constantine, Victor's uncle, and he was smiling in a way that made Lena's skin crawl. "All alone?" Constantine said, moving into the room with the easy confidence of a predator who'd cornered prey. "That's not very wise, little Isabel. Not wise at all." Lena's hand instinctively went to her purse, feeling for her phone. "Victor will be back any second." "Oh, I don't think so." Constantine poured himself a drink from a bar cart Lena hadn't noticed, his movements unhurried. "Victor's dealing with a problem I arranged specifically to keep him occupied, which gives us time to get to know each other properly." "I don't want to get to know you." Lena edged toward the door, but Constantine shifted to block her path without seeming to move quickly. "That's rude. Here I am trying to welcome you to the family, and you're acting like I'm some kind of threat." His smile widened. "Of course, maybe you're smarter than you look. Maybe you recognize danger when you see it." "Victor said I shouldn't be alone with any of you," Lena said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "So I'm going to find him now." Victor says a lot of things, but here's what he doesn't say, doesn't want to say, because it makes him look weak. Constantine took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim. "That marriage of yours? It's fake. A desperate play to placate a dying old man. And I can prove it." Lena's blood turned to ice. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? Then explain why a successful corporate lawyer has calluses on her hands from manual labor. Explain why you flinched when Natasha mentioned an engagement party you supposedly attended in August. Explain why you knew nothing about the supposed charity gala where you and Victor met." Constantine set down his glass with a soft click. "You're not Isabelle Laurent. You're nobody. A desperate nobody Victor hired to play a role to his cell. And once I prove it to Constantine, Victor's credibility is destroyed." Lena's mind raced. Deny? Deflect? Run? "Why do you care?" she asked instead, choosing offense over defense. "Why does it matter to you whether Victor's marriage is real or not?" "Because Victor's been Constantine's favorite since the day he was born, the golden grandson who can do no wrong, and I've spent my entire life watching my father favor my brother, then my nephew, while I get scraps." Constantine's voice turned bitter. "If I can prove Victor lied to Constantine on his deathbed, used a hired actress to manipulate a dying man's wishes, it destroys him, opens the door for someone else to step into his position." "You," Lena said, "you want to take his place." "Finally you understand." Constantine moved closer, and Lena pressed back against a table full of orchids. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me the truth, all of it. How much Victor paid you, what the arrangement is, every detail, and then you're going to disappear. Tonight, before dinner. I'll make sure you get out safely, even pay you something for your cooperation. Or," his smile turned cruel, "you can refuse, and I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. The waitress who spilled champagne on Victor and got bought for her trouble." The waitress who spilled champagne. The specific detail hit Lena like a physical blow. Constantine knew. Had probably known from the beginning. This wasn't a guess or suspicion. This was certainty. "How?" Lena whispered. "I have people watching Victor constantly, including at Le Cygne Noir. The second he showed interest in a nobody server, I started digging. Found your real name, your dead mother, your debts, your desperation." Constantine's expression was almost pitying. "You're not the villain here, Lena Cross. You're just a victim of Victor's manipulation. Let me help you escape before this gets uglier." Lena's options crystallized with brutal clarity. Confess and run, possibly surviving with some payment from Constantine, but definitely losing everything Victor had promised. Or refuse, hold firm, and risk Constantine exposing her to the entire family. Neither option led anywhere good. "I need to think," she said. "No, you don't. You need to choose now." Constantine pulled out his phone. One call to Constantine, and this all ends. Victor's humiliation becomes public. "Or you walk out that door with me right now, and I make this disappear." The conservatory door slammed open. Victor stood there, and the expression on his face was murder barely contained. "Step away from my wife," he said, voice deadly quiet. "Or what?" Constantine didn't move. "You'll lose your temper in front of witnesses? That'll look wonderful to Constantine. His favorite grandson can't even control himself when his uncle has a friendly conversation with his bride." "There's nothing friendly about cornering a woman and threatening her." Victor moved into the room, and Lena saw Adrian and Marcus appear in the doorway behind him, both watching, both calculating. "Lena, come here." Lena moved immediately, crossing to Victor's side. His arm came around her waist, pulling her against him, and she felt the tension vibrating through him like a live wire. "This isn't over," Constantine said calmly. "The truth will come out. It always does." "Then let it come," Victor said. "But if you touch her again, if you threaten her again, uncle or not, I'll end you. Are we clear?" Constantine's smile was thin and knowing. "Crystal." He nodded to Adrian and Marcus. "Boys, Merry Christmas." He left, and the silence he left behind was suffocating. Victor turned to his brothers, and his voice was ice. "What happened? You were supposed to be handling the situation." "We were," Adrian said, but his eyes were on Lena, assessing. "Constantine got past us, used the service entrance." He paused. "What did he say to her?" "Nothing," Lena said before Victor could answer. "Nothing that matters." "Lena," Victor started. "He tried to intimidate me. It didn't work." She met Adrian's eyes directly, refusing to show fear. "Your uncle is not as clever as he thinks he is." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Respect, maybe, or surprise. "No," he said slowly. "I don't suppose he is." He looked at Victor. "She's tougher than she looks. I'll give you that." "Good," Victor said flatly. "Now leave. Both of you." Marcus left immediately, but Adrian lingered in the doorway. "Constantine knows something. You can see it in his eyes. Whatever you're hiding, brother, it's not going to stay hidden much longer." Then he was gone too, and Lena was alone with Victor in the winter light, both of them shaking with adrenaline and fear. "Tell me everything," Victor said, word for word. "What did Constantine say?" Lena told him. All of it, the accusations, the threats, the specific knowledge about Le Cygne Noir. When she finished, Victor's expression was darker than she'd ever seen it. "He knows," Victor said quietly. "Not everything. Maybe not enough to prove it, but enough to destroy us if we're not careful." He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly. "I'm moving up the timeline. We were supposed to stay until New Year's. Now we leave the day after tomorrow. One more day, and we're out. Can we do that? Won't it look suspicious?" "Less suspicious than staying and letting Constantine build his case." Victor pocketed his phone and took both Lena's hands in his. "I'm sorry. I promised you'd be safe. I failed." "You got there in time," Lena said. "That's what matters. This time. But I can't watch you every second, and Constantine will try again." Victor's jaw tightened. "Tonight at dinner, you stay within arm's reach. Tomorrow, we maintain the performance one more day. Then we leave, and this ends." "What happens to Constantine? To his threats?" "I handle them, once you're safe." Victor's eyes held promises of violence that should have terrified Lena, but somehow didn't. "He threatened you. That means he threatened me. And I don't forgive that." The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they filled Lena with a complicated tangle of emotions she didn't have time to process. Because dinner was in 3 hours, and she had to survive one more performance before even thinking about escape. One more day. Then freedom. Then she'd never see Victor Moreau again. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like loss. Dinner that evening felt like walking into an execution dressed in evening wear. Lena stood in front of the mirror in Victor's suite, adjusting the black dress he'd chosen for her. Simple, elegant, Expensive enough to belong, but not so showy as to seem like she was trying too hard. The emerald necklace from Constantine glittered at her throat, a reminder of expectations she might not survive meeting. Her hands trembled as she fastened the clasp on matching earrings, and she couldn't make them stop. "Breathe," Victor said from behind her. He'd been watching her for the past 10 minutes, silent and assessing. Now he moved closer, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. "You're terrified. They'll smell it." "I am terrified," Lena admitted. "Constantine knows. Adrian suspects. How am I supposed to sit through dinner pretending everything's fine when your entire family is looking for proof that I'm a fraud?" Victor's hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steadying. "By remembering that you're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're pretending to be someone you could have been. If your mother hadn't gotten sick, if you'd finished school, if life had been kinder." His eyes met hers in the mirror. That woman, the one who didn't get buried by circumstances. She would walk into that dining room with her head high. She would dare them to find fault. "That woman doesn't exist," Lena whispered. "Then make her exist, for 3 more hours. That's all I need." Victor's grip tightened slightly. "Can you do that?" Lena looked at her reflection, at the stranger in expensive clothes wearing a dead woman's jewelry, playing a role that felt more real with every passing hour. She thought about Constantine's threats, Adrian's suspicions, the weight of every lie she'd told. And beneath all of that, she thought about the promise of freedom waiting on the other side of tomorrow. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." Victor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Good. Then let's go remind my family why they should be afraid to cross me." The dining room had been transformed for Christmas dinner, candles everywhere, throwing soft light across crystal and silver, making shadows dance in corners. The table was set for 20, and most of the family was already seated when Victor and Lena entered. Constantine presided at the head, looking frailer than he had that morning, but determined. His eyes tracked their entrance with sharp awareness, missing nothing. Victor led Lena to seats near Constantine's right hand, positions of honor that also meant maximum exposure. As she sat, Lena felt the weight of all those eyes assessing her, judging, calculating. Constantine sat directly across from them, his smile pleasant and poisonous. Adrian was several seats down, watching with predatory interest. Marcus sat beside him, expression unreadable. "Isabel," Constantine said as wine was poured, "that necklace suits you. Ekaterina wore it the night we got engaged. I told her she looked like an empress." His eyes grew distant with memory. "She told me empresses were prisoners in golden cages. I promised her our cage would be big enough to fly in." The words hung in the air, weighted with meaning Lena couldn't quite grasp. She saw Victor's jaw tighten, saw something pass between grandfather and grandson that looked like understanding and pain. "It's beautiful," Lena said quietly. "I'll take care of it, I promise." "See that you do." Constantine raised his glass. "To family, to Christmas, to new beginnings and old endings. May we all have the courage to face what's coming." The toast was somber, almost ominous. Everyone drank, and Lena tasted expensive wine that she couldn't appreciate through her fear. The first course arrived, some delicate seafood dish that Lena forced herself to eat while conversation flowed around her. The family talked business in careful euphemisms, discussed politics with the cynicism of people who knew exactly how power really worked, traded gossip about people Lena didn't know. She smiled when appropriate, nodded, stayed quiet unless directly addressed. It was Constantine who broke the fragile peace. "Tell me, Isabel," he said, voice carrying across the table. "Victor mentioned you practice corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, wasn't it? That must keep you busy. What firm do you work for?" The trap was obvious, baited, and waiting. Lena felt Victor tense beside her, felt every person at the table lean in slightly, sensing blood in the water. "I'm between firms at the moment," Lena said smoothly. "I left my previous position a few months ago. Burnout. The hours were destroying my personal life, and I decided my relationship with Victor was more important than my career." She took a sip of wine, buying time. "I'm considering starting my own practice. Something smaller, more manageable. Victor's been supportive of the idea." "How modern," Svetlana said from down the table. "Giving up your career for marriage. I thought women didn't do that anymore." I'm not giving it up, Lena corrected gently. I'm restructuring it. There's a difference. Is there? Adrian leaned forward, eyes bright with malice. Sounds like quitting to me? Unless you never actually had a career to begin with. Adrian, Victor's voice was deadly quiet. That's enough. I'm just curious, brother. You've been so secretive about Isabel. Never introduced her to the family, never brought her to any events, and now she conveniently doesn't work anywhere we could verify. Doesn't have family we could meet. It's all very, Adrian smiled, mysterious. There's nothing mysterious about wanting privacy, Lena said before Victor could respond. She set down her fork and met Adrian's eyes directly. Your brother values discretion. So do I. We kept our relationship quiet because we wanted it to be ours, not something performed for family approval or public consumption. If that makes you suspicious, I can't help that, but I'm not going to apologize for wanting to build something real before subjecting it to scrutiny. The words came out stronger than Lena had intended, edged with real anger. Because beneath the lies, beneath the performance, there was truth. She was tired of being judged, tired of having to prove her worth to people who'd been handed everything while she'd fought for scraps. Silence fell across the table. Then Constantine started laughing, a dry, rattling sound that made everyone turn. She's got fire, the old man said approvingly. I like that. Too many people in this family have forgotten how to fight back. His eyes found Adrian. Your brother chose well, smart, beautiful, and not afraid to defend herself. What more could you want? Adrian's expression darkened, but he couldn't argue with Constantine. No one argued with Constantine. The meal continued, tension ratcheting higher with each course. Lena felt it building like pressure before a storm. Something was coming, some confrontation or revelation that would shatter the fragile performance. She just didn't know what form it would take. It was Marcus who provided the answer. I have a gift, he announced as dessert was being served, for Victor and Isabel, to celebrate their marriage. He pulled a small wrapped box from his jacket and slid it across the table. Victor stared at it like it might explode. Marcus, you shouldn't have. But I did. Open it. The entire table watched as Victor slowly unwrapped the box. Inside was a flash drive, innocuous and terrifying. What is this? Victor asked, voice carefully neutral. Memories, Marcus said. I hired a private investigator to track down photos from that charity gala where you two supposedly met. Thought it would be nice to have documentation of such an important moment. His smile was sharp as glass. There are quite a few photos from the August event at the Astoria, lots of familiar faces. I thought maybe Isabel would enjoy seeing them, remembering that magical first meeting. Lena's blood turned to ice. There were no photos of her at that gala because she'd never been there. If Marcus pulled up images and asked her to identify herself, the lie would collapse instantly. That's thoughtful, Victor said, pocketing the drive without looking at it. We'll look at them later. Why wait? Adrian said, suddenly interested. I'm curious to see them too. Marcus, did you bring a laptop? I did. Marcus was already pulling it out, setting it on the table with the casual confidence of someone who knew they held all the cards. This will just take a moment. Marcus, Victor's voice carried a warning that would have stopped anyone else. This isn't the time. When is the time, brother? You've been so secretive. We just want to see the happy couple's origin story. Marcus opened the laptop, inserted the drive, and pulled up a folder of images. Lena watched her execution unfold in real time. The photos loaded, dozens of them. Professional shots from a gala she'd never attended. Beautiful people in beautiful clothes, champagne and diamonds, and everything she'd never been part of. There, Marcus said, pointing to a photo. That's from the bar area where the investigator said you two were spotted talking. Isabel, which one is you? Every eye turned to Lena. She looked at the screen, at the crowd of women who all looked vaguely similar, polished, wealthy, belonging. Her mind raced. Admit defeat? Call their bluff? Run? I'm not in that photo, she said quietly. What? Marcus's eyebrows rose. But the investigator specifically said, your investigator was mistaken about the location. Victor and I met in the library that night, not at the bar. We were both escaping the noise, separately, coincidentally. Lena felt Victor's hand find hers under the table, squeezing hard. We started talking about a book on the shelf. That's how it began. Not with champagne and crowds, but with quiet conversation in a room where no one thought to take photographs. The lie was desperate, improvised, but it had the ring of truth because it was the kind of meeting Lena wished she could have had. Simple, genuine, based on something real. Marcus stared at her, then flipped through more photos. The library. I don't see any photos from... Because people don't photograph libraries at parties, Lena interrupted, warming to the story now. They photograph the spectacle, the dancing, the drinking, the performance. That's why our meeting was special. It was private, ours. She looked at Victor, and the emotion in her eyes wasn't entirely performance. I'm not in any of those photos because I spent the entire evening talking to your brother in a quiet room where no one cared to look. Whose Victor's expression shifted. Surprise, then something deeper. She's right, he said quietly. I'd forgotten how isolated we were, how it felt like the rest of the world disappeared. His eyes held Lena's, and she couldn't look away. How I knew within an hour that I'd found something extraordinary. The words were for the family, for the performance, but the way he said them, the intensity in his gray eyes, made Lena's heart stutter. How romantic, Constantine said dryly, and conveniently unprovable. Most real moments are unprovable, Lena said, finding her voice. That's what makes them real. If you need photographic evidence to believe in a relationship, you've never been in love. The words landed like a slap. She saw it ripple across faces, acknowledgement, discomfort, something like shame from Svetlana, whose own marriage was rumored to be purely strategic. Constantine set down his glass with a soft click that commanded attention. Enough, he said firmly. This interrogation ends now. My grandson has brought home a woman who clearly cares for him, who handles pressure with grace, who doesn't back down when challenged. If you want to question her authenticity, question your own first. How many marriages at this table are based on love versus convenience? His gaze swept the table, landing hard on Constantine and Adrian. Victor chose someone real, someone with spine. I don't need photographs to see that. The patriarch's word was final. The interrogation stopped, conversation shifted to safer topics, and dinner continued. But the damage was done. Lena could feel it in the way people looked at her now, some with grudging respect, others with intensified suspicion. Marcus looked frustrated but not defeated. Adrian looked calculating. Constantine looked like he was already planning his next move. When dinner finally ended, Lena felt wrung out, exhausted down to her bones. The family dispersed to the sitting room for after-dinner drinks, but Victor guided her toward the stairs with a hand at her lower back. We're retiring early, he announced to no one in particular. It's been a long day. No one argued. Lena felt their eyes following as Victor led her up the grand staircase, down the corridor, into the sanctuary of their suite. The door closed behind them with finality, and suddenly the performance was over and she could breathe. Lena made it 3 steps into the room before her legs gave out. She sank onto the sofa, hands shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. You did it, Victor said, kneeling in front of her. You survived. They threw everything at you and you held firm. I barely held firm, Lena whispered. If Marcus had asked me to identify anyone else in those photos, if Constantine had pushed harder, but they didn't. You deflected perfectly. That story about the library... Victor shook his head, something like wonder in his expression. It was brilliant. Unprovable, but completely believable. You turned their trap into something that made us look more authentic. It was luck, Lena said. Pure desperation and luck. No. Victor's hands covered hers, warm and steady. It was survival instinct, the same instinct that's kept you alive through everything else you've endured. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion she didn't understand. That thing you said about real moments, being unprovable, about how photographic evidence means you've never been in love. That was... He trailed off, searching for words. True, Lena finished quietly. It was true. I've never been in love, but I know what real feels like, and it's never documented. It's always the quiet moments no one else sees. Victor was still kneeling in front of her, close enough that Lena could count his eyelashes, see the faint scar through his eyebrow in detail. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines, making him look almost vulnerable. "Lena," he said, and the use of her real name felt intimate, dangerous. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, someone knocked hard on the door. Victor's expression shuddered immediately, the vulnerability disappearing behind ice and control. He stood, crossed to the door, opened it a crack. "What?" His voice was sharp. "It's Constantine," Marcus said from the hallway. "He's asking for you both. Now." Victor turned to look at Lena, and she saw concern flash across his face before he masked it. "We'll be right there." They found Constantine in his study, a room Lena hadn't seen before. Dark wood and leather, walls lined with books that looked ancient and valuable. The old man sat behind a massive desk, and despite his illness, despite the way death clung to him like a shadow, he still commanded the space with absolute authority. "Sit," he said, gesturing to chairs across from him. They sat. Victor's posture was tense, ready for conflict. Lena tried to mirror his composure, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Constantine studied them in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled out a folder, thick, official-looking, and dropped it on the desk between them. "Constantine brought me this an hour ago," the old man said. "Investigation results, very thorough, very damning." Lena's world tilted. This was it. The end. Constantine had proof, and Constantine knew everything. "He claims your marriage is fake," Constantine continued, eyes on Victor. "That you hired Isabel to deceive me. That she's actually a waitress named Lena Cross, who you met when she spilled champagne on you at Le Cygne Noir 3 weeks ago." He paused. "He has photographs, as bank records showing unusual transactions, testimony from the restaurant staff." Victor's hand found Lena's, gripped it hard. "Grandfather." "I know," Constantine interrupted. "I've known since the moment I saw her." The words dropped like stones into still water. Lena felt the room spin, felt everything she'd built collapse. "You knew?" Victor's voice was barely a whisper. "Of course I knew. You think I got this old, this powerful by being blind to deception?" Constantine leaned back in his chair, looking almost amused. "The ring fit her perfectly because you had it sized based on information from her employer. She didn't know anything about the charity gala because she's never been to one. She handles herself like someone used to serving people, not being served." He turned his sharp eyes on Lena. "And when she talked about her mother's death, the grief was too raw, too recent. Not something from months ago when you supposedly met. Something fresh." Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything was over, and she'd failed, and Victor was going to lose everything because of her. "Then why?" Victor's voice was rough. "Why play along? Why give her grandmother's necklace? Why defend her at dinner?" Constantine was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler than Lena had heard it. "Because in 60 years of marriage, I learned one fundamental truth. Real love doesn't care about circumstances. It doesn't care about how people meet or why they come together. It only cares about what they build once they're there." He gestured to the folder. "Constantine thinks he's exposing a scandal, but all he's exposed is that you, Victor, are more like me than I dared hope." "I don't understand," Victor said. "Your grandmother and I?" Constantine's smile was sad and knowing. "That wasn't a love match. That was a business arrangement. Her family needed money. Mine needed social legitimacy. We married as strangers, playing roles for our family's benefit." He paused, eyes distant with memory. "But somewhere along the way, the performance became real. The woman I was supposed to pretend to love became the only person I actually trusted. The marriage that started as deception became the realest thing in my life." Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, overwhelmed by the revelation, by the parallel he was drawing. "So you see," Constantine continued, "I don't care that you hired this girl. I don't care that the marriage started as a transaction. What I care about is this." He pointed at their joined hands, at the way Victor held on to Lena like she was the only stable thing in a collapsing world. "That's not performance. That's not acting. Whatever this started as, it's becoming something else. I can see it. Anyone with eyes can see it." "Grandfather, the contract," Victor started. "I don't care about contracts. I care about whether you're going to be stupid enough to let her walk away when this ends." Konstantine's voice turned sharp. Because that's the real question, isn't it? The 5 days are almost over. The deal is almost complete. And then what? She gets her money and disappears? You go back to being alone? He shook his head. I didn't raise you to be that much of a fool. Silence fell across the study. Lena looked at Victor and saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. Hope, fear, longing, all tangled together. What do you want me to do? Victor asked his grandfather quietly. I want you to make a choice, Constantine said. Not for me, not for the family, for yourself. He looked at Lena. Both of you need to choose. Is this just a transaction that ends when the money changes hands? Or is it the beginning of something real? Lena's throat was tight, words stuck behind emotion too big to name. She thought about those last 3 days, about every moment that had felt too real to be acting, about the way Victor protected her and pushed her and looked at her like she mattered. I don't know how to answer that, she whispered. Then figure it out, Constantine said. Because tomorrow, Constantine is going to demand a family meeting. He's going to present his evidence and try to destroy you both. And your only defense is to decide whether you're going to keep lying or tell the truth and own it. Tell the truth? Victor sounded shocked. Admit it was fake. Admit it started as necessity and became choice, Constantine corrected. Admit that circumstances brought you together, but something real kept you there. Admit that you're not perfect, but you're honest about it. He coughed, and Lena saw how much this conversation was costing him physically. The only power Constantine has is the lie. Take that away by owning your truth, and he has nothing. Victor stood abruptly, pulling Lena up with him. We need time to think. You have until tomorrow at noon, Constantine said. That's when Constantine wants his meeting. Whatever you decide, decide together. And for what it's worth, his eyes softened. I'm on your side. I always have been. They left the study in silence, walking through dark corridors back to their suite. Neither spoke until the door closed behind them, and they were alone again in the firelight. He knew, Lena said finally. This whole time, he knew, and he didn't care. He cared, Victor corrected, moving to pour them both drinks. Just not about the things Constantine thought he'd care about. He handed Lena a glass of amber liquid that burned going down. He cares about whether we're real, whether this matters. Does it? The question escaped before Lena could stop it. Matter, I mean, to you. Victor set down his glass and crossed to where she stood. In the firelight, with his guard finally down, he looked younger than his 28 years, vulnerable in a way Lena had never seen. 3 days ago, you were a stranger who spilled champagne on me, he said quietly. A desperate woman I could use to solve my problem. A transaction, clean, simple, finite. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. But then you held your own at dinner, looked Constantine in the eye and refused to be intimidated, invented a love story in the library that sounded more real than anything I could have scripted, and I started wondering what it would be like if it wasn't acting, if you actually were my wife. Lena's breath caught. Victor, I know the deal. 5 days, I pay you. You leave. We never see each other again. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb brushing her cheekbone. But I'm standing here realizing I don't want that anymore. I don't want you to leave. I don't want this to end. You don't know me, Lena whispered. Not really. This has all been performance and survival and... I know you're brave, Victor interrupted. I know you're loyal. You protected me tonight, even when it would have been easier to confess. I know you're honest about your limitations instead of pretending to be something you're not. I know you loved your mother enough to bankrupt yourself, keeping her comfortable. I know you have steel in your spine and kindness in your heart. His eyes held hers, intense and searching. What else do I need to know? Everything, Lena thought, that I'm terrified, that I don't belong in your world, that I'm falling for you even though I know better. I don't know how to be in your life, she said instead. I don't know how to navigate this world, these people, this constant performance. I'm a waitress from a bad neighborhood who barely finished community college. Your family will never accept me. Constantine will never stop trying to destroy me. And you, her voice broke, you deserve someone who actually belongs here. I don't want someone who belongs, Victor said fiercely. I want someone real. Someone who sees me, not my money or my power or my name. Someone who makes me want to be better than the violence and deception I was raised in. His forehead rested against hers, their breaths mingling. I want you, Lena. Not Isabel. Not the performance. You. The confession shattered something inside Lena, broke through every defense she'd built. She thought about walking away tomorrow, taking the money, disappearing into a life free of debt, but empty of this. This connection, this feeling, this man who'd seen her desperation and treated her like she mattered. The contract, she whispered. The deal was, I'm voiding the contract, Victor said. Right now. You don't owe me anything. The money is yours regardless. If you want to leave tomorrow, you can. But if you want to stay, he pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and Lena saw everything he was offering laid bare. Stay because you choose to, not because you need the money, not because you're obligated. Stay because this matters to you too. Lena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break free. This was insane. She'd known him 3 days of lies and performance and survival. That wasn't enough to build a real relationship on. Wasn't enough to trust this feeling that made her want things she had no right to want. But then she thought about the way he'd protected her from Adrian, the way he'd held her when she was terrified, the way he'd looked at her in the conservatory like she was something precious instead of something purchased. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, Victor said, terrified. This wasn't supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to matter. But you do. And I don't know how to navigate that any better than you do. What do we tell your family tomorrow? The truth. Victor's smile was small and uncertain. That this started as arrangement. That I hired you because I was desperate to give my grandfather peace. That somewhere along the way it became real. He took her hands in his. That we're choosing each other now. Fully. Honestly. Whatever that means. They'll never accept it, Lena said. Probably not. But Constantine will. And he's the only one whose acceptance I actually need. Victor's expression grew serious. This won't be easy, Lena. My world is dangerous. My family is toxic. There will be times when you question this choice. Times when the violence and deception become too much. I know. Lena squeezed his hands, feeling the ring, grandmother's ring, heavy on her finger. But I've been drowning for so long, desperate and alone and fighting just to survive. And these past 3 days, even with all the fear and performance, I felt more alive than I have in years. She met his eyes. I'm not ready to give that up. Give you up. Something like joy broke across Victor's face, transforming the harsh lines into something almost beautiful. He pulled her close, arms wrapping around her, and Lena let herself be held, really held, for the first time since her mother died. Tomorrow will be ugly, Victor murmured against her hair. Constantine will try to destroy us. Adrian will watch for weaknesses. The whole family will judge and calculate. Are you ready for that? No, Lena said honestly, but I'll do it anyway. Victor laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. That's my girl. My girl. The possession should have bothered her. Instead, it made Lena feel claimed in the best way, chosen in the way she'd always wanted to be chosen. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in firelight and each other, the performance finally over and something real beginning in its place. Tomorrow would bring its battles. But tonight, in this moment, Lena let herself believe that choosing Victor Moreau might be the smartest thing her desperation had ever made her do. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they sat by the fire and talked, really talked, for the first time since this had begun. Victor told her about growing up in a family where love was leverage and loyalty was purchased, about watching his father die in a parking garage when he was 19, blood pooling on concrete while Victor held him, and promised to be stronger, smarter, more ruthless, about the weight of inheriting an empire built on violence and the constant calculation required to keep it from collapsing. Lena told him about her mother's diagnosis, about choosing between rent and treatment, about the slow erosion of dignity that came with poverty, about working 3 jobs and still falling behind, about the shame of food banks and overdue notices, about the particular loneliness of being the only one responsible for keeping another person alive. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, as the fire burned low and snow fell soft outside, Lena realized she'd told Victor things she'd never told anyone, and he'd done the same. "We're a disaster," she said, head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Two broken people trying to make something whole." "Maybe that's the only way it works," Victor said quietly. "Two people who understand brokenness, who don't expect perfection because they know it doesn't exist. Your family will hate me. Most of them already do. The rest will come around or they won't. Either way, it doesn't change what I want." "Which is?" Victor turned to look at her, gray eyes serious in the dying firelight. "A real chance. With you. Not 5 days of performance. Not a transaction. A real relationship where we figure out together whether this feeling is just desperation and proximity or something that can actually last." Lena's throat tightened. "And if it doesn't last? If we try and it falls apart?" "Then at least we tried." Victor's hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I've spent my whole life calculating risks and managing outcomes. Just once, I want to do something without knowing how it ends. I want to choose you and see what happens." The vulnerability in his voice undid her. Lena leaned in and kissed him, soft, tentative, their first real kiss that wasn't for performance or witnesses. Victor responded immediately, pulling her closer, and for a few perfect moments there was nothing but this, the heat between them, the way their bodies fit together like they'd been designed for each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow," he said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Agreed?" "Agreed," Lena whispered. Dawn came too soon, pale light filtering through windows and turning the world outside into something crystalline and cold. They dozed off on the sofa sometime around 5, wrapped around each other, and woke to insistent knocking on the door. "Victor," Marcus's voice, urgent. "Constantine wants everyone in the main sitting room, now. Constantine's calling the meeting early." Victor was on his feet immediately, all softness replaced by the cold calculation Lena had first seen in him. How early? 20 minutes. He's already got half the family gathered. He's telling them he has proof of fraud. "Let him." Victor looked at Lena, and she saw both determination and concern in his expression. "Get dressed. Something strong. We're going to war." Lena chose a dress the color of midnight, simple and severe, with the emerald necklace at her throat like armor. She twisted her hair up, applied makeup with a steady hand despite her racing heart, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like someone who belonged, someone who'd earned her place, someone who wasn't going to back down. When they walked into the sitting room together, hand in hand, the entire family was waiting. Constantine stood by the fireplace, folder in hand, expression triumphant. Adrian sat nearby, watching with avid interest. Marcus leaned against a wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. Svetlana and the other wives clustered together, whispering. And Constantine sat in his chair like a judge presiding over court, waiting to see what would unfold. "Ah," Constantine said when he saw them. "The happy couple. So glad you could join us for this little family discussion." "Cut the performance, Constantine," Victor said flatly. "Say what you came to say." Constantine's smile sharpened. "Very well. I'll be direct." He opened the folder and pulled out photographs, spreading them across the coffee table. "These are surveillance photos from Le Cygne Noir, dated 3 weeks ago. That's you, Victor, having champagne spilled on you by a waitress. And that's you," he pointed at Lena, looking terrified, not like a successful corporate lawyer, like a broke server who'd just ruined her only source of income. Murmurs rippled through the family. Lena felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging. "I also have bank records," Constantine continued, pulling out more documents, showing a large payment from Victor's account to Alina Cross, not Isabelle Laurent, dated 4 days ago. "I have testimony from the restaurant manager confirming that Lena Cross worked there until she suddenly quit without notice the day after this incident." He looked around the room, making sure everyone was paying attention. "And I have this, a contract signed by both Victor and Lena Cross, outlining the terms of a 5-day arrangement where she would pose as his wife in exchange for payment. The contract, Lena felt ice flood her veins. She'd signed it in Victor's penthouse, and somehow Constantine had gotten a copy. Where did you get that? Victor's voice was dangerous, deadly quiet. I have my sources. Constantine's expression was smug. The point is, I have proof, irrefutable proof that your marriage is a fraud, that you hired a desperate waitress to deceive our dying patriarch. He turned to Constantine. Father, Victor has lied to you, used your love for him to manipulate you. He deserves to be removed from his position immediately. Silence fell across the room, heavy and suffocating. Lena waited for Constantine's rage, for the explosion that would end everything. Instead, the old man laughed. Is that all? Constantine said, sounding almost disappointed. Constantine, I expected better from you. This dramatic revelation, this smoking gun evidence, it's all very theatrical, but ultimately meaningless. Constantine's expression faltered. Meaningless? He lied to you, hired an actress to play his wife. How is that meaningless? Because I already knew, Constantine said calmly. Have known since the moment I met her. Did you think I'd reach this age, this position, without learning to spot deception? He gestured to the photographs and documents. Your evidence just confirms what I already suspected. Congratulations, you've wasted everyone's time. The room erupted. Family members talking over each other, confusion and shock rippling through them. Constantine looked like he'd been struck, his triumphant expression crumbling into disbelief. You knew? Adrian said, standing. And you accepted it anyway? I did. Constantine's gaze swept the room, commanding silence. Because I recognize something that apparently none of you have learned, that how something begins doesn't determine how it ends, that circumstances bring people together, but character keeps them there. He looked at Victor and Lena. Yes, this started as a transaction. Yes, Victor hired Lena to play a role. But somewhere in these past 3 days, something real developed. I've watched them. I've seen the way they protect each other, the way they've chosen to face this together rather than separately. That's not acting. That's partnership. That's fraud, Constantine insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. That's survival, Constantine corrected. Victor needed a solution to an impossible situation. Lena needed a way out of crushing debt. They helped each other. And in the process, they found something neither was looking for. He turned to the rest of the family. How many of you married for love? How many married for strategy, for money, for family alliance? Yet you stand here judging these two for being honest about what you all pretend isn't true, that most marriages start as transactions and only become real through choice and work. The words landed like blows. Lena saw it in their faces, the acknowledgement, the discomfort, the unwilling recognition of truth. So what now? Svetlana asked quietly. If you knew it was fake, why let them continue the charade? Because it's not a charade anymore, Constantine said. Look at them. Everyone turned to stare at Victor and Lena, still standing hand in hand facing the room together. And Lena realized what they must see. Two people who'd unconsciously moved closer as the confrontation escalated, who stood shoulder to shoulder like soldiers facing fire, who looked at each other with something that couldn't be faked. That's real, Constantine said softly. Messy, complicated, born from desperation, but real. And I'll take messy reality over perfect fiction any day. He looked at Constantine. Your move failed. Not because I didn't believe your evidence, but because I don't care about how they started. I care about what they're building. And if you can't see the difference, you're more foolish than I thought. Constantine's face flushed with rage and humiliation. You're making a mistake. She's nobody. She has nothing to offer this family except courage, Victor interrupted, stepping forward. Except the strength to walk into a room full of predators and hold her own. Except the honesty to admit when she's afraid instead of hiding behind arrogance. His voice grew harder. You want to talk about what she offers? She offers more integrity in her desperation than you've shown in your entire entitled life. Victor, Lena said quietly, touching his arm. Let me. She stepped forward, leaving Victor's side for the first time since entering the room. Every eye tracked her movement as she stopped in front of Constantine, looking up at the man who'd tried to destroy her. You're right, she said clearly. I am nobody. I was a waitress drowning in debt, desperate enough to accept a stranger's offer because I had no other options. Everything you said about me is true." She paused, letting that sink in. "But here's what you don't understand. That desperation taught me things your privilege never could. It taught me how to survive impossible situations, how to adapt and endure, how to find strength when there's nothing left to lose." She glanced at the family. "You all grew up with safety nets, with money and power protecting you from consequences. I grew up with nothing, and that nothing made me into someone who doesn't break easily." She turned to Constantine. "You asked if this matters to me. If I'm choosing Victor or just taking his money. Here's my answer. I'm voiding the contract. The money doesn't matter anymore. I'm staying because I choose to, because in 3 days your grandson showed me more respect and protection than I've known in years. Because he looked at my desperation and didn't exploit it, he met it with his own." Her voice grew stronger. "I'm not Isabelle Laurent. I'm Lena Cross. And I'm choosing to be here, in this family, with all its toxicity and violence and judgment, not because I have to, because I want to." The silence that followed was absolute. Lena's heart hammered, but she kept her chin high, refusing to show fear. Then Constantine started clapping, slow, deliberate applause that filled the room. "Well said," the old man said approvingly. "That's what I wanted to hear. Not performance, not deception, just honest choice." He looked around at his family. "Does anyone else have objections? Because if so, voice them now or accept this and move forward." Adrian stood slowly. For a moment, Lena thought he would challenge them, would add his voice to Constantine's accusations. Instead, he crossed to where she stood and extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "I thought you were just another gold digger using my brother, but gold diggers don't void contracts worth 6 figures. He glanced at Victor. "You chose better than I gave you credit for." Victor's expression shifted. Surprise, then cautious acceptance. He shook his brother's hand and Lena saw something pass between them, some old wound beginning to heal. Marcus approached next, his usual unreadable expression softening slightly. "I still don't trust easily," he said to Lena, "but I respect what you did. Walking away from guaranteed money because it was the right thing to do, that takes guts." He looked at Victor. "Take care of her. She's tougher than she looks, but everyone breaks eventually if they're not protected." "I know," Victor said, pulling Lena back against his side. "I will." One by one, the family members approached. Some offered genuine congratulations. Others gave stiff acknowledgments that were at least not hostile. Svetlana actually smiled when she hugged Lena, whispering, "Welcome to the family. We need more women with spine around here." Only Constantine remained apart, standing by the fireplace, his folder of evidence useless in his hands. "You're making a mistake," he said to Constantine one final time. "Accepting this circus undermines everything this family stands for." "This family stands for survival," Constantine said firmly, "for doing whatever is necessary to endure. Victor and Lena understand that better than you ever have. Now sit down, shut up, and accept that you've lost this battle." Constantine's jaw worked, rage and humiliation warring in his expression. But he sat, defeated, and Lena felt the last thread of tension release from her shoulders. It was over. They'd survived. Later that day, after the family had dispersed and things had returned to something resembling normal, Lena found herself alone with Constantine in his study. He'd asked to speak with her privately, and despite her exhaustion, she'd agreed. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where, just last night, he'd revealed he knew everything. Lena sat, folding her hands in her lap, waiting. "That necklace suits you," Constantine said, eyes on the emeralds at her throat. "Ekaterina would have liked you. She had the same fire, the same refusal to be diminished by circumstance." He paused, coughed once, a wet, rattling sound that reminded Lena of her mother's final days. "I'm dying. You know that. Weeks, maybe days. The doctors keep changing their estimates, but the outcome is the same." "I'm sorry," Lena said quietly. "Don't be. I've lived longer than most men in my position, seen my grandson become the kind of leader I'd hoped for, and now in my final days I've seen him find something I was afraid he never would." Constantine leaned forward, expression intense. Do you know what the greatest tragedy in our world is? It's not the violence or the deception, it's the loneliness. The isolation that comes from never being able to trust anyone completely, from always calculating, always suspecting, always protecting yourself from betrayal. Lena thought about the past 3 days, about the constant performance, the endless assessment. I'm beginning to understand. Victor has lived like that since he was 19. Since the day his father died and he inherited this burden, he's been alone, even surrounded by family, especially surrounded by family. Constantine's voice grew rough with emotion. You changed that. In 3 days, you gave him something he hasn't had in 9 years. A partner. Someone who stands with him instead of behind him or against him. Someone who chooses him without agenda. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that, Lena admitted. This world, your family, I'm still learning the rules. I'll make mistakes. Of course you will, but you'll make them honestly, and Victor will forgive you because he knows you're trying. Constantine pulled open a drawer and extracted a small box, different from the one that had held the necklace, older and more worn. This is for you, from me. Not because you're his wife, but because you had the courage to choose truth over comfort. Lena opened the box to find a ring, simple gold band worn smooth with age. I don't understand. That was my wedding band. I wore it for 60 years. When Ekaterina died, I stopped wearing it because nothing felt right after she was gone. Constantine's eyes grew distant. I want you to give it to Victor, not now. Someday when you decide to make this official, when you choose each other for real, with witnesses who know the full truth. When that day comes, give him this ring and tell him it's from me. Tell him I blessed this union not because it was convenient, but because it was real. Tears burned behind Lena's eyes. What if that day never comes? What if we try and it doesn't work? Then you'll have tried, and that's more than most people in this family can say. We're good at many things, but honest effort isn't usually one of them. Constantine settled back in his chair, looking more tired than Lena had ever seen him. I don't have much time left, but I want you to know, in these final days, you gave me something precious. You gave me proof that my grandson can love honestly, that he can choose partnership over power, that maybe this family's legacy won't just be violence and strategy. He smiled, and despite his illness, it was genuine. Thank you for that, Lena Cross. Thank you for believing in me, Lena said, voice breaking, for seeing past what I was and recognizing what I was trying to become. You're already there, child. You just need to believe it yourself. 3 months later, on a cold March morning, Constantine Moreau died peacefully in his sleep with his family surrounding him. Victor held his hand at the end, and Lena stood beside him, and the old man's last words were for both of them. Build something real, he whispered, something worth the mess. They buried him in the family plot with full honors, and Constantine tried one final time to challenge Victor's leadership during the funeral reception. But the family, having witnessed the strength of Victor and Lena's partnership, having seen how they faced challenges together, voted unanimously to support Victor's position. Constantine left that night and never returned to the estate. Adrian took over some of his responsibilities. Marcus stepped up to handle others. And slowly, carefully, the family structure shifted to accommodate the new reality. Lena moved into Victor's penthouse officially, leaving behind her studio apartment and the life she'd known before. The adjustment was harder than she'd expected, learning to navigate wealth, learning to handle the constant assessment from business associates, learning to distinguish real threats from imagined ones. But Victor was patient. He taught her the rules of his world, introduced her to people who could help her finish her education, supported her when she decided to pursue a degree in business instead of trying to fake a legal career she'd never had. He protected her from the worst of the family's toxicity while letting her fight her own battles when she needed to prove herself. And somewhere in the chaos of building a real relationship, of navigating family politics and business obligations, of learning to trust each other with more than just survival, Lena fell completely in love with Victor Moreau. Not the cold, calculating man who'd hired her, not the performance they'd crafted, but the real Victor beneath the ice, the one who woke from nightmares about his father's death and let her hold him. The one who brought her coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked. The one who protected her fiercely but never made her feel weak. The the one who asked for her opinion on business decisions and actually listened to her answers. 6 months after Constantine's death, Lena woke on a quiet Sunday morning to find Victor already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Marry me," he said. "For real this time. Not a performance, not a transaction, a real marriage with witnesses who know the whole truth." Lena's breath caught. "Victor, I know we're already legally married from the contract. I know we've been living together, building this life. But I want to do it right. I want to stand in front of people who matter and choose you publicly, honestly. I want there to be no question that this is real." He pulled a small box from the nightstand, the worn box Constantine had given her months ago. "I found this in your drawer, my grandfather's ring. I think he'd want me to use it now." Lena felt tears spill over as Victor opened the box, showing her the simple gold band that had symbolized 60 years of real love built from circumstantial beginnings. "Yes," she said, voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you. For real. For always." Victor slipped the ring onto his own finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "I love you, Lena Cross. Not who I hired, not who I thought I needed. Who you actually are. Messy, stubborn, brave, real." "I love you too," Lena whispered against his chest, "even though you're complicated and dangerous and your family is insane." "Especially because of that," Victor said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony that Constantine would have approved of, honest, intimate, with only people who knew the full truth in attendance. Adrian served as Victor's best man. Marcus gave a toast about how strange beginnings often lead to the strongest foundations. Svetlana caught the bouquet and joked about finding her own desperate waitress to shake things up. And when the minister asked if they took each other for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, Lena and Victor answered together, voices strong, hands clasped, the dead woman's ring replaced by simple gold bands that symbolized choice instead of circumstance. "I do." The reception was small but joyful, filled with people who'd learned to respect Lena's place in Victor's life. As they danced their first dance as a truly married couple, Lena looked around at the faces watching them. Some still skeptical, some genuinely happy, all of them accepting. "What are you thinking?" Victor asked, pulling her closer. "That Constantine was right," Lena said, "about building something real being worth the mess, about how things begin not mattering as much as what we choose to make of them." She looked up at her husband, really her husband now, chosen and choosing. "We started as a transaction, we became a partnership, and now we're something I don't even have words for." "A marriage," Victor said simply. "A real one, built on honesty about our beginnings and hope for our future." "And love," Lena added. "Don't forget love." "Never," Victor promised, and kissed her while their guests applauded and the winter sun streamed through windows, turning everything to gold. Years later, when people asked how they met, Lena and Victor would smile and tell the truth, that she'd spilled champagne on him, that he'd hired her to play his wife, that it had started as pure desperation on both sides. The story made people uncomfortable, made them question their assumptions about love and authenticity. But it was real. It was honest. It was theirs. And in a world built on deception and strategy, that honesty became their greatest strength, because they'd learned the hardest lesson, that real love doesn't care about circumstances. It only cares about choice, about waking up every day and choosing each other again, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when the reasons that brought you together no longer matter. What matters is the decision to stay, the choice to build something real from broken pieces, the courage to transform a transaction into a partnership, and a partnership into a love that lasts. Lena Cross had walked into Victor Moreau's world with nothing but desperation and a borrowed name. She stayed as herself, flawed, real, and absolutely certain she'd made the right choice. And Victor, who'd spent his life calculating risks and managing outcomes, learned that sometimes the best things happen when you stop performing and start living. Together, they built an empire on honesty, a family on choice, a marriage on the radical belief that how you begin doesn't determine how you end. And when their first child was born 3 years later, a daughter with Lena's determination and Victor's gray eyes, they named her Ekaterina. after the woman who'd taught them all that real love transcends circumstance. The little girl wore her great-great-grandmother's emerald necklace on her christening day, and everyone who saw it remembered the story of how two desperate people found each other on Christmas Eve and chose to turn a 5-day contract into a lifetime of belonging. That was their legacy. Not the violence or the money or the power, just the simple, radical act of choosing love over convenience, truth over performance, and each other over everything else, every single day for the rest of their lives.